So welcome everybody. Welcome all of you who have come in person. Fortunately, it's cooler today. And welcome to everybody who is here virtually. We're so happy to have people locally, far and wide, to be with us at this important event, or set of events. I want to let you know that there is ice available. It's over here. You can put it in a plastic bag if you're here in person. Sorry you can't get it if you're not. We also will have book sales this afternoon at 4:30, 5:30 later today. And you can see the books that are set up on the table in the back. So I'd just like to begin. I'm Sue Castelletto, by the way. I'm sorry. I introduced myself yesterday and I forgot that some of you may not know who I am. I direct the Intercollegiate Feminist Center for Teaching, Research, and Engagement. And we, along with the Department of Politics and the Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies Department, we're sponsoring Andrea Ritchie's visit this semester at Scripps College as the O'Brien Distinguished Visiting Professor. And we're so happy to have Andrea with us for 6 weeks and as the major planner of this conference. So I want to begin by offering Scripps land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we sit within the historic homeland of the Tongva people. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and colonization in our area. We acknowledge the strength and resilience of the Tongva people of the past, present, and future as the original caretakers of the land, water, and air. And we recognize our responsibility to be respectful stewards of the Scripps College campus. Today, this area and this campus are home to many Indigenous people from across the globe. And we are proud that they are part of our community and institution. So next, Gretchen Edwalls-Gilbert, our distinguished and wonderful Dean of Faculty, will offer some words of welcome.
Thank you, Sue, and thanks to all of you for being here, whether it's in person or virtually. It's impressive, as Andrea said, the numbers just keep rising of people coming in by Zoom. And I know it's an exciting 3-day conference with yesterday having opening conversations, today, Abolition, Feminism in Action. I'm sure everyone will learn a lot from that. And what a bunch of esteemed speakers from around the world, and that's very exciting. And then tomorrow, closing with building abolitionist agendas. And it's very impressive how many students have registered for this as well. So I appreciate all the organizing done by Andrea and her team to bring this to Scripps and to have over, I know we had, as of late last week, we had over 130 students from across the colleges registered for this. So that is very much for an academic conference. This, as Sue mentioned, there are many co-sponsors of this event. And Sue has led the charge by bringing Andrea to campus, writing the proposal for the Irma Taylor O'Brien Visiting Distinguished Professorship at Scripps College. I just want to let you know what that is. It allows Scripps to host scholars and residents whose expertise in the liberal and fine arts fields significantly enriches academic thought. Then Sue got the funding, thanks to COVID hit, and here we are. And Andrea is finally here, but it's very exciting that we are able to host her. The other ones at Scripps, as she mentioned, politics, our Feminist Gender Sexuality Studies Department, the O'Brien Lectureship, the Backstrand Chair in FGSS, and of course, our amazing Office of Public Events, who has been here supporting us so that we are able to host this here. So without further ado, I wanted to thank everyone for being here. Have a great day, learn a lot, and then put it into action.
Thank you so much, Dean. It's such an honor to be here, and I apologize for being on my phone. I'm just trying to resolve people's tech issues, and I know that Mark was going to say a few more words before we jump in.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Hi, my name's Mark Golub. I teach in the politics department here at Scripps College. And I also organize for critical resistance up in Oakland. This is one of the magic features of pandemic, isn't it? dissolves our boundaries in certain ways, so I can organize with folks up in the Bay Area. And I feel like saying, I use he, him pronouns and my access needs are met. And I'm feeling very, very happy to see all of you here. And I know that there are a ton of people on this Zoom. It's just such a great feeling to see my place of work transformed into a movement space, because it doesn't always feel that way. And so it's really quite a delight to have everybody here. And I know it takes a ton of work to make that happen. So I want to thank everybody who made that happen, especially to Andrea for being here for so long and being so generous with your time, energy, and genius. Also for Sue for making it all happen, and the college for supporting it. I'm thinking about, well, one of the things that I think about a lot, trying to do the kind of work that I do in a place like this and bridge these two worlds of doing some organizing and also doing some teaching, is what does it mean to do abolition work in a space like this, which is, you know, well, a space like this. And I was thinking about what Andrea was saying yesterday, right? When you see the beauty of the location and the orange trees and all of this, right? The first instinct is, well, we got to get everybody in here. And I just think that's so beautiful. But as somebody who works in a space like this, I have a slightly different conflict, which is to always be thinking about how I can shift resources from here out to try to not only bring in abolitionist ideas and materials into my classroom to organize with students, but also how we can take all of the incredible privilege and over-resourcing that you see around you and try to make that available to the work that we're all here and we all care about. So I know we've got a lot of work to do, and I don't want to go on and on, but I do just want to say a few things about how some of the faculty here who are engaged in a kind of abolitionist faculty formation, how we encounter some difficulties and how we're trying to face those difficulties. So the first thing I want to do is just lift up the incredible work that's happening with the students from the Reseda Collective. They are really getting after it. They're bringing incredible speakers to campus, and when they do, those are resources from the college that go out to the organizations that are bringing those speakers here. They're particularly interested in transformative justice work and have been bringing some amazing folks here. They're also really good at getting students to actions that are happening, you know, particularly around in Los Angeles. So when I go to actions, it's really great to start seeing more and more of my students. I was in an action from Justice LA to shut down the Men's Central Jail, and there are my students who are showing up. And also, amazingly, some of my former students are now organizing these events. So a special shout out to Janet Asante at Justice LA and DPN, and also to Olivia Gleason at CURD. And a special thank you to my former student, Jess Haney, who brought me in to critical resistance because I was able to get some grant money to create a course called Practicing Abolition Democracy, the whole conceit of which was students will learn more from doing movement work than simply reading books. So what happens if the whole premise of the course is trying to make this space available, bringing in somebody from the organization, getting the resources, and then trying to slot the students into that work. And I think it was pretty successful, but it's also difficult to do that. It's hard to do that in a way that doesn't draw resources out of organizations so that there's just a good experience for students. But there are also ways to make that happen. So I've been trying more and more in my classes, and I know this is true for other faculty as well, to create working groups in the classroom that would be organizing. Right now I have a class that's working with CURB. I have a class, a working group in the class that's working with CCWP. And it's just really nice to see how we try to struggle with those issues to make those connections. So I guess I want to say mostly thank you and welcome for coming to this conference. And I guess I also want to end with a little bit of an ask. The ask is for faculty who are watching on Zoom or are here now to think more intentionally about how we can organize our classrooms in order to shift those resources and to make that study and struggle connection possible. And then the other part of the ask is for all of the incredible organizers who are showing up here today to try to keep in the back of your mind ways that you could think of that you might be useful so that you can help us slot into the work because there's so much desire to do so. Thanks very much.
Mark. It's funny because Mark introduced himself to me this morning. I was like, I feel like I've known. It's like, oh, I read your work when we were writing the book. That's why I know this name. So, and thank you for that, and for all of the work that you and other folks are doing on campus. I also really want to thank Sue Castanetto for persisting through a pandemic to bring me to campus, first to speak and then as a scholar, and just also for all of the incredible fundraising that she's done to make this conference possible. And Kevin's doing something, okay, and to be able to, for us to be able to compensate organizers and scholars for their participation. And I know that there's many co-sponsors who made that possible. I just want to appreciate all of them. And just, also the Dean, the Office of the Dean for being here, and also for this distinguished O'Brien professorship. I know my parents are chuckling in the ancestral realm at hearing so many people refer to me as distinguished, because anyone who knows me knows I'm not that. And it's been just really an incredible experience to be in community with all of the abolitionist students and faculty on campus, and to be able to bring organizers to this gorgeous campus. And really want to thank the 5C Prison Ab Club and all of the student volunteers who are making it possible for you to buy books at lunch and breaks. And the class of 2022 for inviting me to be their commencement speaker. I don't really understand how that happened, but thank you. And also want to shout out Professor Pia Chatterjee, who I was in Insight with, who actually was the first person to bring me to Scripps campus in 2015, and I think kind of started the chain of events that brought you all here today. So just again to reference what Mark was talking about, this week leading up to the conference, organizers from 20 cities across the country were able to meet in person, many of them for the first time since the pandemic, despite spending countless hours on Zoom together to actually see each other in 3D and enjoy the sunshine and the sights of Scripps, while also assessing where we are and where we're going in movements to defund and abolish the police. So we're really grateful to Susan, and again also to Marty Martin over there, who makes all things happen. To the Scripps event team, who were like problem solving cool as cucumbers over there, and just everyone at Interrupting Criminalization, and also lifting up my comrade Remy and colleague Remy Carbanda, who's also answering frantic emails from people right now, for all the work that went into making these 2 days of conversation possible. And I'm also grateful beyond measure to my friends and comrades and all the speakers who accepted an invitation among many demands on your time to join us in person and from around the world to be part of these conversations. So, as I mentioned yesterday, and welcome to 166 people on Zoom. Oh my God, it's stressful. Okay. So as I mentioned yesterday, the title of the conference is taken from Abolition, Feminism Now, which is one of the books you'll be able to buy at the back, and I'm reaching for it in the bag because, as you'll see, it's deeply tabbed and well used. And the title, it's definitely one of the main inspirations for the conference, and the title is drawn, as I said yesterday, from a sentence in the book describing the Insight Critical Resistance statement on gender violence and the prison industrial complex as an 11-point statement that identified at its core precisely why abolition must be feminist and why feminism must be abolitionist. So I wanted to just name that directly, and their invitation to be in study and practice of abolition feminism, which they define as incorporating a dialectic, a relationality, and a form of interruption, and insistence that abolitionist theories and practices are most compelling when they are also feminist, and conversely, a feminism that is also abolitionist is the most inclusive and persuasive version of feminism for these times. And this book was written by my teachers and touchstones, Angela Davis, Gina Dent, Erica Miners, and Beth Ritchie. We are very fortunate that we'll be hearing from Erica Miners today, and that the books are here for sale starting at lunch. Also wanted to acknowledge that the graphic for the conference is inspired by a photo booth that was hosted by Love and Struggle Photos, at the No Selves to Defend exhibit that was curated by Mariam Kaba, who I was in conversation with last night, my comrade and co-struggler and dear friend. And sort of the idea that people were holding signs that said prison is not feminist is a challenge to carceral feminisms, which posit cages as the answer to violence, when, as we'll hear many times today, and we learned from CCWP, that 90% of people in California prisons assigned to women are survivors of violence. So you can see some of the pictures from that at the Prison Is Not Feminist Tumblr. Anybody remember Tumblr? Remember that? And then also you can see more about the No Selves to Defend exhibit at their Tumblr also. And it's No Selves 2 with the number 2 defend. And we're encouraging folks who are in here and online to tweet along the conversations today at ABFEM 2022, ABFEM, Mary, I can think of there, 2022. And today's conversations are going to be more conversational than presentational. This is not an academic conference. It's one for organizers, and also because we know many folks are zoomed out, and also maybe because I secretly aspire to be a talk show host, and maybe someone down the road in LA can help make those dreams come true. But without further ado, I want to turn to our first panelists who will ground us in history as Mariam did yesterday. I'm not a historian, but I always start there because, as James Baldwin teaches, history is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. So I want to invite Sarah Haley and Treva Lindsay to the virtual stage. Here they are. Amazing. Oh my God, Sarah, so good to see you. It's like you're here. I don't know if y'all can see, but you're like large in the room, and looking beautiful, both of you. So thank you for being here. Sarah's incredible and just always gorgeously written work has really been a touchstone for me in rooting my work on policing and criminalization of Black women and queer and trans people in history. And you can read more about her. Things are happening.
Sorry.
Hey, it's awesome.
There we go.
Yay, thank you. So you can read more about her bio in the link on the conference website, and I think they'll drop that in the chat for the webinar to go to the bio page. And I'm just going to ask Sarah and each of our panelists to introduce themselves as they would like to describe themselves, but also to describe yourself for people who are visually impaired or can't see you for whatever reason. Maybe they're listening as they're driving. So I'll model that. I'm a very light-skinned Black woman with curly hair who's wearing blue glasses and all Black in 85-degree heat, because even though I'm currently based in Detroit, I was a New Yorker for 20 years, so that's what's happening. And so I'm gonna invite you all to do the same as you jump in. And I'm gonna start with you, Sarah, because we quote you in No More Police from No Mercy Here, where you write, "The very possibility of Black subjects' claim to womanhood was a perceived threat to white supremacy, and the carceral state was a key mechanism to crush such a possibility." So can you please introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining us from, describe yourself, and say more about this and how this reality has shaped Black feminist anti-carceral movements.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, like you're here, like you're right here.
It is mortifying to think of us as being that large on the screen, but that's okay. I just want to say thank you to Scripps and to say thank you to Andrea Ritchie for having me be part of this conversation. And with Treva Lindsay, I'm really excited to hear more about Treva's thoughts on these questions too. But first I'll say, being invited by Andrea is not, being invited by a colleague. It's like being invited by a superhero, right? Like a Black feminist, abolitionist superhero who is always at the right place at the right time, always leading the way and helping us to reframe all of these issues. So it's a real honor. So I am a light-skinned Black queer woman who is wearing gold earrings and a brown sweater. I am in New York, calling in from New York, and I'm so sorry, Andrea, but I couldn't hear the quote. Something cut out when you were reading the quote. So I can speak generally about history, or if you want me to think about the quote specifically.
Oh no, people need to hear this quote over and over again because it's one of your many brilliant things. So it was, the very possibility of Black subjects' claim to womanhood was a perceived threat to white supremacy, and the carceral state was a key mechanism to crush such a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, essentially what I was trying to argue about the 19th century in that quote and in general is that the carceral state, both then, and I would extend this to now, right, is a form of gendering. It's an institution of gendering. It is enacting everyday carceral gendering. And so, one of the things that's really interesting about, say, movements against violence in the 19th century is that you find this kind of recognition and critique in unusual spaces. So, for example, people like Selena Sloan Butler and Mary Church Terrell, who are usually thought of as quite respectable Black women reformers, very much lauded in Black feminist history, but also symbols of the politics of respectability. They approach the carceral state in recognition of two things. At that point in the late 19th and early 20th century, it was primarily a system of convict labor. That was the dominant system of carcerality in the South. And they didn't say, well, this system is wrong because the Black women inside are innocent. They didn't say this system is wrong because, there's too much labor happening. They argued that the system was inherently a source of violence, and they recognized, right, that there was this project at hand, a carceral project to enforce gender normativity by positioning Black women as the anathema to that, as everything that normativity wasn't. And so there's this project of racialized gendering that happens through carcerality. And just, one thing about this history that I think is instructive for today is that even though a figure like Mary Church Terrell or Selena Sloan Butler or the organizations they represented, the National Association of Colored Women, they may not be considered abolitionists by today's standards, right? They didn't say, take on the whole carceral regime, but what they did do is has important abolitionist instruction for today, which is to say, I don't care if anyone in that system is innocent or guilty. Right? What I care is that this is a system that both imposes specific forms of violence against Black women who are positioned as queer in relation to white femininity, but also is inherently, endemically a form of violence and gender violence at that. So I think we can learn from that 19th century example.
I got it. Brilliant. And everyone just pick up your phone and Google No Mercy Here and hit purchase or lend from your local library. I'm going to tell you to do the same thing about the book released literally 2 days ago. We don't have copies here because we couldn't get them fast enough, by Treva Lindsay, called America Goddamn, Take on Mississippi Goddamn by Nina Simone, Violence, Black Women, and the Struggle for Justice. So I just can't wait to get my hands on this book and read it, and just inviting you now, Treva, to introduce yourself. Let us know where in the world you're joining us from, and how this history is very detailed and beautiful history of resistance to violence against Black women, and the history of violence that you describe in America Goddamn has shaped our abolitionist organizing today.
Good day, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here, to be called here on a panel with Sarah, who I'm so excited to be in conversation with as well here today, and all of you. And Andrea, just thank you for all of your work. It's just, my journey to abolition is so much through your work and learning from your work, and the deepening of the communities that I've become introduced to through folks like you and Miriam Kaba. And I'm just so thankful that my feminism is different because of learning. And so I consider myself a student of abolition, and really growing in that in my own feminist practice and in my own work. I am joining you all today from Columbus, Ohio, which is the occupied land of the Mound people, here and there, and acknowledging that. I am a brown-skinned Black woman. I have my hair pretty long locks. I have kind of half up with a side bun thing going on, with a side ponytail on the opposite side of that, with some gold earrings, a gold necklace, and a black V-neck dress. And I'm sitting on a couch in my home. And so with America Goddamn, and so much of this comes from wanting to take a historical approach to thinking about what this struggle looks like. And so in thinking about the roots of abolition, and I'm so happy that Sarah mentioned that what we think about as abolition, it's amazing to think about it as a growing tradition, and a tradition that is expanding and in many ways is anchored in the lived experiences and material realities of Black women, who are in many ways responding to an exclusionary politics of protection, as indicated by historian Callie Gross, of saying, we're aware that the criminal legal system and the systems that are intact, be that anti-Blackness, white supremacy, patriarchy, are literally rooted in the exploitation of our productive and reproductive labor, that we have an entire criminal legal system that is so deeply rooted in that offers no semblance of what we would consider protection, that the notion of safety or vulnerability are not attended to within that system. So early on, you have Black women creating modes of restorative justice. You have modes of transformative justice that are intracommunally established by individuals. And they're reckoning with all of these ideas about Black women not defeminizing, ideas about Black womanhood, but they're also railing against the strictures of womanhood that are happening in this moment. So you have someone like a Frances Thompson, who is a Black trans woman, a formerly enslaved Black trans woman, who is brutally raped during the Memphis riots in 1866 and testifies before Congress about her experiences alongside other Black women. And in that moment, there's this attempt to think about what a systemic response may be, but that system is unable to reckon with who she is, what has happened to her, and how to ever keep her from having that kind of harm happening to her in systems that are built upon a devouring and carnivorous appetite for Black people, and particularly Black women and girls. And so the struggle for justice for me, and the framing that I was trying to attempt to get out of this book, is looking at all of these ways that anti-Blackness, patriarchy, ableism, capitalism, transphobia converge and create a certain condition by which Black women are constantly having to imagine new worlds and imagine new possibilities for what it means to rail against precarity, what it means to rail against unfreedom. And so the practice of abolition in so many places across kind of a historical trajectory are about what are the new ways in which we can imagine ourselves that are not bound by these conditions of unfreedom and don't rely upon systems that are consistently criminalizing, demonizing, and attempting to dehumanize Black people.
Well, just a few thoughts to start us off today. Brilliant, thank you. Hit these books, my God. Sarah, there's so many things I love about your book. I just keep coming back to it, and it's, you write about hard things, but you write about them so beautifully and with such love and care. And I know as a historian, you really take seriously going back into the archive and writing Black women fully in 3 dimensions, and finding ways to do that from, one-line mentions and one-line, or even a word here and there or an image. And I just want to invite you to share, if you want, sort of more, because I know there's historians here who talk about the Rebel Archive and how we do that. So if you want to talk more about that, and I'm going to do a double question because, there's no objections in this court. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is that often we talk about, or we hear people talk about, carceral systems as sort of intended to put a chokehold on Black men, for instance, who are imagined to be cisgender or heterosexual, and that to the extent that there's an impact on Black women, it's collateral consequences. And I always, or collateral damage. And I always hold up your book and say, hell no. This system was set up specifically to constrain Black women's economic, social, reproductive, sexual autonomy in and of itself. So if you were willing to speak to either or both of those things, I would be so deeply grateful.
Thank you for those questions, Andrea. I mean, because they're at the core of everything that I think about with respect to this struggle. And so in terms of the second question, I mean, definitely part of writing No Mercy here was to say that the touch points, the moments that we look to when we're thinking about what is the trajectory of carceral violence and racial violence in the US. And when I was, thinking about this work in the 2000s initially, people then and still now do, right, talk about slavery to convict leasing to mass incarceration or the carceral state, right? And so in turning to the period of convict leasing in the 19th century, I wasn't endorsing that historical genealogy necessarily, but I was wanting to say that even if we think, right, that there's this formative violence, carceral racial violence in the 19th century that we understand as convict leasing, that's being lifted up by sort of dominant movements as a precedent to today. We have to understand that as gendered. We have to understand that as impacting Black women as queer subjects in particular ways through specific forms of violence. For example, rape as a kind of benefit to prison guards, right? Sexual access to Black women. And of course, that's true in many ways today. So we have to think about the gender-specific violence, the forced labor that Black women were forced to endure and being estranged from their children after giving birth to children inside convict lease camps, forced forms of gendered labor, socially reproductive labor that they were forced to perform, cooking and cleaning to maintain the system of their own captivity and that of those around them. So that's specific. But that also, right, that these ideas about gender are constructing the whole system. And so it's not just that particular forms of violence are imposed by particular people, but what abolition allows us to see as an analytic is that the system is intrinsically violence in and of itself, and it's upholding gender and gender ideology, gender binary, gender normativity, even if, say, somehow we were to eliminate rape entirely from the system, right? It is itself a form of gender violence. And so those are kind of things that I wanted to show the roots of. But, this is related to your question about the archive, Andrea, which is, not to mention social media and Twitter in a way that's, negative, because I mean, if I could tell you how many times in my current abolitionist feminism class, people quote Mariam Kaba, I will never critique Twitter. Like, that is such a gift, right, of the knowledge that social media enables. But there are people coming after my work on Twitter saying you're just trying to deflect attention from, the primary subjects of this, who are men. And if we say that rape is something that primarily impacts Black trans people, queer people, and women, you can't say convict leasing impacts women. That primarily impacts men because more men were incarcerated in convict lease systems. And so there's a way in which quantification and numeracy, the numbers of people impacted, and the use of data in a way that minimizes the actual gendering that's happening and the specific forms of gender violence. And that's used to have this, narrative, right? To extend this narrative of only a singular subject, right, of carceral violence is worthy. And so that's where, I think the archive becomes both a powerful tool and, can be a form of erasure.
And the work you do is just so beautifully countering that and just doing so much honor and tribute to the people who have been erased or very, limitedly referenced in it. So I'm just so grateful to you for that labor. And then Triva, I just wanted to pick up on this question around visibility, because I do think that your book is an effort to be like, listen here, this country is built on violence against Black women and queer and trans people. Like, there is no avoiding that. There's no amount of turning away from that can erase that truth. And I think sometimes the call for visibility can become a carceral call, right? Like, we're not paying attention to missing and murdered Black women or Indigenous women, right? And the answer is that, you know, as we so often say, the way we measure the value of a life is by how much time someone does in a cage for taking it or harming it, right? And so I know, because I just know your work, that you are using America Goddamn to firmly turn people's gaze both to the violence and to the not carceral as a response. So can you say more about that historically and presently?
Absolutely. And I love, Sarah, that you just ended on this question of like the quantification and numeracy, because the archive in many ways gives us certain ways to quantify and think about numbers. And also there's still things that become illegible depending on what you go to the archive in search of, and what signals you're looking for, what stories you're looking for, who you're looking for, why you're looking for them. And part of doing this work about visibility and the tricky politics of visibility for me are more about a commitment to a rail against a politics of disposability. And I mean that both in approach and how we talk about this. So one of the ways I think about this is the life-affirming ways I talk about the people in the book. Who were they before this spectacular moment in which they become a quantity in relationship to a data point about the murders of Black women or missing Black women, or, you know, what is happening with maternal morbidity? I'm really looking at what was happening before this moment. Who are these people? Who are they in community with? How are systems structured that in many ways made violence so integral and almost ubiquitous to the environments in which they're living in, and looking at a kind of historical trajectory of people responding to that in ways that are outside of this criminalizing impulse whereby we're saying perpetrator, victim. It is much more taking a structural and systemic and genealogical approach to understanding how we got here. I want to know why it's 90,000 Black women and girls missing. Right? I'm less concerned with the individual, like this is this person, beyond understanding who this person meant to their loved one and what happened, or that individual perpetrator. But how are we at a place where that can happen and that it isn't something that we're reckoning with on a regular basis? And what are the interconnected forces that are at play to make that kind of data set possible, to make these loved ones missing that many people? Because if there are 90,000 Black women and girls missing, there are 90,000 kinship networks, communities, et cetera, that are missing someone, that have disappeared from someone, and that impact that community, that family, that kinship network in very distinct ways. And so for me, that's less about identifying, here's the harm doers and here is those who are harmed. It's about saying, how do we get to harm, and how do we wrest harm out of our communities? How do we wrest harm out of the hands of those who would so willingly inflict injury and harm upon us in these systemic and structural ways? And how do we begin to undo that? How do we begin to undo that outside of a criminal punishment system that is predicated upon violation and death dealing and soul crushing and eliminating communities? And so our impulse has to be different. Our impulse has to be one that is a life affirming, that is about soul affirming, and that is about us seeking to transform, upend, disrupt, rebuild, and imagine.
Okay, I could really spend all day talking to y'all because history really is present, and there's so much to inspire us in our resistance now, in the ways that Black women, queer, and trans people have always resisted carcerality, have always been abolition feminists, even if not in name, in the ways that both your work points out. So hopefully maybe we'll do that, like a whole deep dive on that someday. I really love that. But I wanted to even bring, before we bring the present day organizers up and into the conversation, I wanted to just note that both of you are also organizing in the present now. So I know that before you were at Columbia, Sarah, you were focused on UCLA cops off campus work. So if you want to give us a quick minute on that. And then Treva, I know you were organizing around the police killing of Ma'Khia Bryant and are doing work in Columbus yourself. So show us how historians are still agitating in the present.
So yeah, I was involved in organizing at UCLA before moving to New York this year, and also work with Scholars for Social Justice, which is trying to think about anti-carceral modes of creating safety and community and knowledge in educational contexts across the country. But I really have to lift up my colleagues' work in Southern California, in Survived and Punished, California Coalition for Women Prisoners. I mean, one of the things I really wanted to talk about is the 1970s and early 80s precedents for linking interpersonal violence with racial and state violence that work by Emily Thuma and others lifts up. And that's a direct genealogy, a direct connection to the work that lots of folks in California and around the country are doing around defense work and anti-carceral abolitionist feminism today.
Thank you. Fortunately, S&P will be here and CCWP will be here later in the day to build on that. So I appreciate that. And then sorry, Treva, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So here, still working with Ivette and the family of Ma'Khia Bryant in the aftermath of her murder here in Columbus, Ohio, working with our students on campus, which is similarly moving to get cops off campus. In Columbus, we have both we have an Ohio State Police Department as well as the Columbus Police Department who are expanding. And we recently had a huge expansion, a $20 million expansion of the presence of cops on campus. So working with our undergraduate student government, as well as students organized against cops on campus here, and also working with and alongside and learning from Be Quick, a Black queer collective here in Columbus that really came into existence in the wake of the Black Pride 4, who were arrested and targeted during Columbus Pride to really help us think about the unique experiences of Black, queer, and trans folks in Mid-Ohio. So working there on that and on Transformative Black Feminist Night School, which is a community-based night school based at Azora's house here in Columbus that's open to anyone and everyone and thinking through ideas. Our first one was Abolition that we started almost a year and a half ago. And so really growing in that way and building with other educators, organizers, artists, creators to think through these ideas together and do some really amazing Black feminist consciousness raising.
Thank you both so much. We are just incredibly grateful to you all for grounding us today, for pointing us to this long history and trajectory that we're leaning into. We hope you'll stick around, and we know that you're both incredibly busy and have other responsibilities on a Saturday. So if you're not able to stick around, enjoy the rest of your day. But thank you so much for being here. And let's be in conversation again soon. I can't wait to continue the conversation. So thanks so much to Sarah, Haley, and to Lindsay. Give it up. Up your emoji. All right, thank you so much. Also, the students here, there's something on the ballot here now about security and campus, and vote no. Okay, I'm probably not supposed to say that, but you know, they'll tell you more about it at the Prison Abolitionist Club here, so thank you. So we are going to move fully into the present now, and so we wanted to, as we're making this transition and inviting Richie and Angélica to come up here, to share a video highlighting the work of the organizers who were here over the past week, and some of whom are part of this next conversation on movements to defund and abolish the police over the past 2 years. So I think that Nails and Kevin are going to make it happen immediately, if not sooner.
We had an ask that we divest $25 million from the Milwaukee Police Department and invest that back in our communities. We knew we had a short window before the 2020 budget, and in that time, we were able to educate folks on the budget. We were able to raise folks' analysis and start the visioning session on what a world with less police and eventually without police would look like.
You don't have to be police all your life. Now y'all kill black people while you stand side by side. You don't have to be police all your life.
Hi, my name is Norma. I'm from PAD. You need some help? You need some help? Because we don't want the police to come along and take you away for something that's not necessary. You need some help?
Situation when you have your roof fall in or you've had a conditions issue, what happens when you call that into the city? They condemn the house. What happens to the tenant in the house? You get put out anyway. It shouldn't be like that.
Feel like they matter. You know, they help design this park. They're gonna say, there is a place for me in my neighborhood that I can walk to. It will just give them a sense of this is theirs.
sounds of black in the back, I know you feel it. I write like Maya, lead like Harriet. My truth at Ruth Ginsburg, forever carrying. Inspire like Michelle, through our generation, take over and prevail. With private education, we try and excel through any situation. You can never fail with the right determination. Do it well, time and tell, just be patient. The truest rule of bell against the war that we're facing. Open arms, get in line and embrace it.
Today is to talk about how me and you are the solution, how we keep each other safe without having to rely on folks with guns. Today, the purpose of this space is to dream beyond, right? And where would we be today if people didn't dare to dream beyond their conditions? Our ancestors did that. You have to be brave enough to dream outside of what you're living in.
Yeah, I'm not crying, you're crying. Okay, well,
Yeah.
Also wearing makeup for the first time in 2 years. I'm like, this maybe wasn't a wise idea. Okay. I don't even know where to start from there, but let's dive in and start with the organizers at the epicenter. You saw her in the video from Minneapolis. Well, the video was from after this, but the epicenter was Minneapolis in May 2020. We're joined today by Kandace Montgomery of Black Visions. Oh my gosh, you're so gorgeous. I miss you. So good to see you. I've had the honor and pleasure of being community and struggle with over the past 2 years and before, who graciously agreed to write a foreword for No More Police with Miski Noor. And Kandace, you and Miski and Ritchie and other members of Black Visions have really repeatedly emphasized throughout this struggle how much Black feminism shaped your organizing and your powerful call to action. And so I'm gonna ask you, like I asked other folks, to please describe yourself in all your gorgeousness for folks to hear. And tell us where you are, maybe what you're doing there if you want to, if it's public, and say more about the role of Black feminist theory and practice in those Minneapolis defund movements that inspired so much of what we just saw.
Cool. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
It's also very strange to like see myself on the screen in the screen. Meta. Anyways, my name is Kandace Montgomery. I use she and they pronouns. I'm a light-skinned Black woman. I've got braids that are somewhat salt and peppered from these organizing days, and a white kind of mesh shirt on with a little Kandace emblem gold necklace on. And I am with Black Visions. You know, we're actually named Black Visions. We've dropped the collective just for, Miski would kill me if I didn't say that. I'm based here on Dakota and Anishinaabe land, also known as Minneapolis in Minnesota. And I'm one of the co-executive directors of Black Visions and one of the 7 co-founders of Black Visions. What was the other parts of your question, love? That I think before that formal question.
How Black feminist theory and practice inspired y'all in the movements, and that, you know, they started long before May 25th, 2020. So how they shaped your trajectory as an organizer.
Yes, and also just like a little bit about what we do and all the things. Okay. First of all, thank you everybody for being here. It was such a privilege to hear from the amazing folks beforehand and just like continue to get inspired and writing down all of the notes. A little bit about Black Visions. We started in about 2017. A lot of us were part of the Black Lives Matter movement here locally, and we're able to really be inspired by the change that we were able to make, and then also really seeing the need to create some sustainability and some real strategy around how we not only respond to Black death, but also fight for Black life. And that's really like the dream and the vision that Black Visions comes out of, is wanting to, you know, be unapologetically Black, be unapologetically radical in our approach and in our politic, but also be able to actually move our folks along, you know, move our people, our everyday folks who aren't politicized, who aren't sitting on Zooms or, you know, scrolling through political theory on Instagram, actually figure out the ways that we are connecting those folks to this really important conversation. And as I was thinking about the prompt and the question, I was, you know, like for me, especially stepping more and more into Black, queer, and feminist organizing spaces and abolitionist spaces is really where I started to find home in organizing. You know, like organizing was one of the things that I always name as something that saved me because it gave me hope, and it felt like it was a means out of a lot of the situations that I come from, and just like the terribleness of seeing the world as a young, and the world as it actually is as a young person versus the sort of narratives that you've been told. But Black, queer, and feminist organizing in particular, I think was the first space that ever I felt I was able to be my full self, and that was actually encouraged, and that was actually seen as critical to our political strategy, that like my full and truest experience was what was actually necessary as a place to start investigation for what are the solutions. And as someone who, since a young person, I have been doing work around mass incarceration in prison, a lot of those original narratives were like, well, you're here as a helper because you're a Black woman and not a Black man, right? And though I've never been incarcerated, I've watched every man in my family be incarcerated. And what I have also watched is the women who take care of them and who are paying those bills, you know, like those expensive ass ramen bills, and who are working overtime and more to be able to support folks on the inside and also support our families on the outside. And so for me, that was really a politicizing moment to be like, yo, why are you trying to erase us out of this story when we're very much impacted, outside of the fact that we are also incarcerated and, you know, all of the things that the speakers were talking about but for me, that was part of my experience, and feminism has really like shaped my analysis, especially in thinking about like, what are the strategies that we want to deploy? You know, I'm an organizer through and through. I like, my joy is going on the doors and talking to folks. And also, you know, part of that is really thinking about the process of how we do that, I think, is where feminism comes into my organizing and my abolitionist analysis, is that it's not just about like what we are doing, but how we are doing. And so for Black Visions, one thing that's really important to us and how we even are in practice of feminism is how we build a collective organization that is not just relying on hierarchy as a way to make decisions, that is pushing against, you know, the radical edge of the nonprofit industrial complex, because unfortunately, we got to be in it, you know, some of us got to get paid. And also we need real resources to be able to provide the needs that our communities have. But how do we do that in a way that is more feminist, that is allowing folks to come through as their full selves, and is structured around more collectivism, and really like honing that and seeing that as a strength rather than, I think, a lot of the traditional organizing that I had been trained in saw that as a weakness, and that was very a male-centric way of thinking about organizing. So those are some of my initial thoughts, but I'll pass over to the rest of the crew to share.
Trust me, we will come back to you, Kandace. Thank you so much for grounding us in that. Just want to name that the call that emanated from Minneapolis, as all of you know, in May 2020 spread worldwide. And there were many moments I was like really struck by how far it traveled. And I was born in Canada, and one that really grabbed me was when I saw that folks in Regina, Saskatchewan cut and paste the demands that Kandace and others put in a Google Doc, and cut and paste that and put in a petition to the Regina city government. You can Google where Regina, Saskatchewan is now if you need to, but it really, to me, was striking in terms of how far this demand reached. Reached, I think that's the word. Anyway, so we're going to invite Robyn Maynard to the stage now, who's a beloved friend and comrade, who is the author of Policing Black Lives, State Violence in Canada, From Slavery to the Present, available for sale on that back table, and who's also the co-author of the forthcoming gorgeous and brilliant Rehearsals for Living with Leanne Batamasake Simpson. And you can pull out your phones and pre-order that right now too, or ask your library to get it. And Robyn has really created an incredible number of resources for defund organizers in Canada, and has been engaged deeply in movements to abolish policing there for over a decade. And one of the things I really love about her books is how deeply they root abolitionist movements in Black feminism. So I can invite Robyn Maynard to the screen and ask you to please introduce and describe yourself and tell us more about those Black feminist dreams and visions and how they shape defund work in Canada.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here with all of you. Andrea in particular, as a dear friend and comrade, and also somebody who's been so important in my life, in my work, for so many of us here and all around this world. So I just want to say really thank you. I know that you put a lot of work into making this happen. And there are so many people who are part of this panel today who I hold all of you in such high regard. And I'm really happy to be here alongside you today. I am a light-skinned queer Black woman. I have long locks. They're half blonde because it's sort of courtesy of a grown-out pandemic ombre. Although people who were born in the 2000s told me that this is fashionable now, so my pandemic hair has become cool, which I'm loving. I'm speaking to you from Toronto, and I'll just be speaking a little bit, about how Black feminism has influenced some of my work, how Black feminism has shaped how I conceive of and think about, historicize, and write about, as well as contest police and policing. So Policing Black Lives, which came out in 2017, was never just about giving a history. The subtitle of the book is The History of Policing in Canada from Slavery to the Present. But it was never just about a historicization of law enforcement in Canada from slavery to the present, but about the practice of police and policing as embedded within a whole carceral regime from a Black feminist and abolitionist perspective that looks at the ways in which policing is actually part of all state institutions, the ways that, and it also looks at the ways that carceral practices that encompass the state institutions that we are so often invested in resisting are also shaped by settler colonialism, by the longstanding legacy of Indigenous genocide in Canada. And the reason I think that policing in this text is so much focused on not only looking at the way that surveillance and punishment and policing is part of law enforcement, but also border regimes, but also the child welfare system, but also part of the schooling system, was because the work was actually shaped by a long history of organizing and witnessing and working alongside Black women and Indigenous women and cis and trans and gender nonconforming women, especially in a kind of work that shows us how all the multifarious ways in which policing takes place if we're looking to beyond the realities of cis men as well. So some of the community work that I had been involved in previous to this was helping co-found Justice for Victims of Police Killings, which was a group of many different families of people who's been killed by the police, including Bridget Tolley, Julie Matson, and others, pushing to end the practice of police investigating police. We were trying to create what used to be the largest database of people who'd killed by police in Canada, because there's no records of that, though fortunately since that, some of that work has been massively extended, which thank goodness, but especially have a long history of work, feminist work, doing street-based outreach at a by-and-for sex worker organization, working with Black women involved in street-based economies, working to help folks have access to harm reduction materials, doing prison visits and prison workshops, and supporting people who are managing racist violence, of social workers trying to keep access to their kids, supporting people fighting to get access into shelters, doing violence de-escalation. And of course, what this makes clear is that, as much as policing is a really important part of violence against sex workers' lives, against Black women's lives in particular, you're also coming up against so many other elements of the system that involve gendered and racialized surveillance, that involve gendered and racialized policing. So for me, by the time it came time to make sort of an accounting in book form of this, it was already very much a part of this analysis, which of course has already come to us through so many generations of scholarship from folks, many of the people here today, for example. So one of the things that really helped, I think, shape this kind of Black feminist analysis was working towards the decriminalization of sex work, which there was a really strong movement in the early 2000s that culminated in a Supreme Court challenge in Canada that was happening between 2009 and 2012 around the decriminalization of sex work. But I think what became so apparent, especially as we were starting to see some really important wins in this, though they were overturned, and I won't get into that, was seeing that while decriminalization is necessary for abolition, the decriminalization of sex work, of course, the decriminalization of drug, because it does chip away at the kind of carceral violence that we see that is able to be enacted on people's lives. But that's not interchangeable with abolition, because decriminalization without a broader abolitionist vision still leaves the broader carceral system intact, even though I think it's crucial and life-saving work to chip away at one of its arms. So coming up against this frustration over and over, I think if we look to the realities of Black women, and if we take a Black feminist perspective, we can see that even without prostitution laws as one reason, for example, that cops are allowed to stop and search Black women on the street, we know that if policing is left intact as a system of managing racial and gendered economic inequalities, we're always going to see the ongoing fabrication of new reasons and new inroads, right? Undergirded by the fact that policing is intact as a system. So if it's not suspicion of prostitution, we have vagrancy, we have loitering, there are so many other ways in which this kind of criminalization is still just embedded into the management of Black people more broadly in Canada, which is, of course, for those of you who aren't familiar, also a country with a legacy of several centuries of slavery, as well as segregation in its own form. So all of this is really just to sort of highlight that when we're seeing people violently pushed to the margins of so many social systems, we also see, I think, the expansive vision for what abolition could be. We see how many transformations are necessary. And Andrea, you point this out so beautifully in your work, that of course, addressing things like racial profiling and police on the street and the kind of violence that are often understood to impact Black men is crucial. But again, if we're understanding the kinds of policing that are taking place in Black women's home by social workers, by the child welfare system, and more broadly, we actually also have a much more expansive vision for what abolition can be, a much more holistic vision that looks to the multiple and overlapping and mutually constituting arms of carceral state violence and repression, and asks us to build actually a radically different world.
We will come to your visions for that radically different world in the second round of the panel, but I just want to land for folks how incredibly succinctly and powerfully the roots of Black feminist analysis in abolitionist movements are articulated there and in the book, and also the piece about how, Canada and other countries that are similarly built on chattel slavery and settler colonial states are engaged in these struggles, but from their own locations and their own experiences. So I hope that you're dropping in the chat, Robyn, the links to all your books. And I can't wait to come back for the question about shaping futures. Want to come locally here, Los Angeles and Southern California were also powerful epicenters of the 2020 uprisings. Many Scripps students were involved. And today we're joined virtually by Ivette Ale of Justice LA and Dignity and Power Now. And even though Ivette is in LA, if you've ever been in LA traffic, you know why Ivette is joining us virtually. So Ivette, can you please describe yourself and tell us how you've seen feminism shape local defund movements? And of course, everyone's bios are available on the conference website. Be sure to go check them out in detail. But go ahead, Ivette, give us the glimpse.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. My name is Ivette Ale Perlito. I'm still getting used to the name change. I just got married. I am a light-skinned Latinx queer femme with long, dark hair and a bright orange shirt that reads Justice LA. I just first wanted to thank Andrea for inviting me to be in space with such powerful scholars and organizers. And Andrea, it's always such an honor, a pleasure to share space with you virtually or physically. You really model what it looks like for academia and scholarship to work with organizers on the ground and really take the lead from folks on the ground, which is such a rare thing and beautiful thing to see. So I just really want to honor you and thank you for your approach to our work. So I, like I shared, I'm a Latinx femme, I'm a queer femme, I am an immigrant, and I'm a daughter of a formerly incarcerated person, and have had several generations of my family criminalized by the system. And a lot of what I've learned about feminism and how it influences my organizing has been both through scholarship, through Black feminist scholarship, through the teachings of Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality, through queer scholarship and the writings and the organizing and the work of folks like Audre Lorde and Gloria Anzaldúa and Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who really have taught me that we take care of us. Their work and their scholarship, their writing, their organizing really highlighted for me that not only does a system not work for us, not protect us, is not designed to do that, but that we know best what makes us safe and have demonstrated in practice through STAR in New York, through the work of an organizing of sex workers for decades. We see what it looks like to build the alternative. The alternative is not in the future. The alternative is happening right now on the ground. And we see that through the work of organizations like Dignity and Power Now, who have robust health and wellness components to their organizing, because it's not just enough to do the policy and advocacy work, but we really need to be building the alternatives on the ground so our folks are taken care of now. And so for Dignity and Power Now, that looks like having health and wellness teams that we dispatch when our community members are having a crisis, when someone's loved one has been killed by law enforcement, whether on the streets or inside of the jail systems. We're able to dispatch resources, health and wellness resources, to take care of our community members in real time. On the policy side, we've been building those alternatives through our advocacy work with LA County. So we successfully stopped a $3.5 billion jail expansion plan here in LA, the largest jail system in the nation. And they were planning to build 2 new jails, a quote unquote mental health jail and a quote unquote women's jail on toxic soil. And it took nearly a decade of organizing when it looked like, the paperwork was signed, the checks were being cut to the contracting firms to build the jails. Millions of our taxpayer dollars were being wasted every month to start the process. And it looked like we lost. In fact, organizations here in LA told us, you know what, it's not going to happen. Folks that were our partners were like, y'all have done a good job for a few years stalling the process, but it's going to happen. And we were still able to win. Even when we lost, we still won. So it's a really great example of how multiple generations of organizing built up to this win, and how even when it looks like we lost, even when right now we're experiencing this media narrative shift, we're seeing our electeds who had once stood by all the demands to defund the police suddenly backtrack on those promises, backtrack on those commitments. Now, just because they're in that space right now, it doesn't mean we're not winning. And so the jail fight is just such a palpable example of how we can keep building. And we won not just by telling the powers that be what we didn't want, we also told them what we did want. And we were actively building and providing very, very detailed plans to actually realize those plans. And so part of the process was developing the Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group Final Report. So as a alternative to jail construction, the county created a work group, a county commission, to develop this robust roadmap to building alternatives to incarceration. And many of us spent over a year working across from the sheriff's office, from the probation department, from the district attorney's office, having to nail down these recommendations, and we out-organized the hell out of the county. Not only did we have voting members on the commission, Justice LA was widely represented on that commission because our coalition is so deep and so expansive. We were able to have folks like Dolores Canales from the Bail Project, Unisas Hernandez, my comrade and co-founder of La Defensa. We had Isaac Bryan from $1 Million Hoods, who's now Assembly Member Isaac Bryan. We had so many of our team members that had voting power equal to the county. And we brought the masses. So the community, thousands of community members were able to actually engage in the writing of these recommendations. But I want to bring it back to the feminist root of how we got here. We were able to push the county to develop subcommittees within that structure for trans, gender nonconforming folks, TGI folks, LGBTQ plus folks, and for cis women. And the most radical recommendations came out of those work groups. When we were able to center those voices in the process, we were able to push the bar and out-organize. And without that analysis, without that lens of what particularly impacts those communities, what particularly impacts Black women, to really hone in on not just the data, but the day-to-day experiences and storytelling that was at the heart of pushing the county in the right direction, we were able to benefit everyone. And so it was a really great example of when we center those that are most impacted in the process of policy making, we're able to actually push the bar for everyone that's impacted by these systems. And the last thing I'll share in terms of, the influence of feminism on our abolitionist organizing, I want to speak a little personally here. So part of my story and my history is being a survivor of sexual trauma, of domestic violence and interpersonal violence in my family. And as a result, one of my parents ended up incarcerated due to that violence. And what abolition and feminism really provided me is a pathway for healing, a pathway for radical forgiveness that I wouldn't otherwise have had. Being able to understand that we take care of us, that we know what accountability looks like to us, that the system doesn't do that. Because in that process of criminalization of my loved one, my family was left houseless. We didn't have our primary breadwinner. We were undocumented. And so we weren't able to access any resources. And we knew from that process, I knew since I was a child that calling the police on my loved one was not an option because we can be deported, because our family would be separated. And my story is not unique. So many of us, not just within Justice LA, but just in the community at large, have been impacted in this way. We've been separated from our families and loved ones, and we did not get justice. We did not get accountability in that process. And so both my abolitionist framework informs my feminism, and my feminism informs my abolitionist framework. That in order to really keep us safe, we really need to build alternative systems outside of the criminal legal system.
Wow, thank you so much, Ivette. here, including SCRIP students who traveled out to be at those hearings and be part of those struggles and movements. And I really appreciate you lifting up the ways in which abolitionists and movements to defund police are survivor-led movements for exactly the reasons that you articulated. And also wanted to appreciate you appreciating me and the fact that I actually organize this way because I am an organizer. I'm a temporary visiting professor. I'm actually really an organizer. And people often clown me also for how big my panels are. And it's really because it's the organizing meeting I want to have that I'm inviting y'all to watch. So appreciate you all being here for that. And just all the work that y'all done in LA. Many of you might not know, and we're coming back to you for what those freedom dreams are for the future in LA. So definitely want to hear more about that. But many of you might not know that one of the most successful and comprehensive campaigns to defund police was waged just up the road in Seattle by the Decriminalize Seattle campaign. So don't sleep on Seattle. Only people from the 90s will get that joke. Okay. But they were the only city to defund significantly 2 years in a row. And to kick the cops out of their local labor council and build a broad-ranging coalition of over 200 organizations to advance their solidarity budget. So we're incredibly lucky to be joined today live and direct in person by one of the main architects of this campaign and one of my beloved friends and comrade, Angélica Cházaro. So please introduce yourself, describe yourself for the people who can't see you, and tell us how feminism informs your work, not only around defunding police, but also defunding immigration enforcement.
All right, thank you, Andrea. I can't believe I'm here, present physically, sitting next to you instead of over Zoom. Still, I am a light-skinned Latina woman with a blue and white striped shirt, big red glasses, and hair that is waving down to my shoulders, and that became much more gray during the past 3 years than it used to be. I want to say the other reason I think your panels are so big, Andrea, is because no one's going to say no to you, right? Like, you show up for us, right? Like, I could call you at 10 p.m. and be like, now City Council's doing this, what do I do? And you would jump on. So I have so much gratitude for the ways you show up for us and have shown up for us in that video that, I can't think about because I'll cry. So thank you for that. So when I thought about this question of analysis and organizing, I thought about the ways in which Black feminism, women of color feminism has made it super clear to me that the only answer is we keep each other safe, that the only answer is defund police, dismantle policing agencies, from your local cops to the Border Patrol to ICE, right? And this is something that is constantly reinforced. So just this week, there was a New York Times article where they found out that the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General, so this is like their internal watchdog person for ICE and CBP, the policing agencies of immigration enforcement, was omitting reports on domestic violence and sexual assault by ICE and Border Patrol officers on each other, right? So more than 10,000 employees had experienced sexual harassment and sexual misconduct from coworkers who responded to this survey that went to 28,000 of them, right? So that means that more than a third of those surveyed had experienced sexual harassment or sexual misconduct, and 78% of them had not even bothered reporting it to anyone until the Inspector General asked, right? And so to me, that brings us back to what Sarah was saying in the last panel, saying, the carceral state is a form of gendering, and the system is inherently a source of violence, right? This to me, thinking about the violence that's just happening between Border Patrol and ICE officers on each other made me think about the moment under President Obama's leadership when the Department of Homeland Security under Janet Reno, who some of you may be familiar with, changed the definition of corruption in Border Patrol to exclude what they called non-mission compromising corruption, which meant excluding reports of rape and murder of migrant women from reports to Congress, because Congress was finally saying, hey, we see some really alarming reports coming out of the Border Patrol. And they're like, oh, we'll just change the definition. So now you don't have to hear about that anymore. We're not going to change anything, right? And this was pre-Trump administration. And so for me, those moments last week and, back during the Obama years and every moment in between has made it clear that the only answer is to defund the Border Patrol. The only answer is to dismantle ICE, to abolish ICE. So being involved in the Not One More deportation movement during the Obama years and the Abolish ICE and all the things in between, for me is a call and a demand to stop any contact between ICE and Border Patrol officers and TSA officers and any other policing officer and the public, right? Because I know that the only way we keep each other safe is if we have not one more interaction between a cop and the public, right? And so the things we're being told, having a trans woman responsive immigration detention center, no, just shut it all down, end immigration detention. That is a feminist ask because these agencies are inherently violent, right? Then the way that this is played out in Seattle, other people have already said this, but like Defund Seattle Police Department was like inherently a survivor-led movement, right? So like the same people whose like day jobs were working for places like API Chaya and the Northwest Network, which are places that have really embraced a pushback on carceral feminism and embraced non-police forms of response to sexual violence and domestic violence, were the ones who were leading the organizing and making the demands to defund Seattle Police Department by 50%, right? The same people who were supporting massage parlor workers in the International District, Chinatown of Seattle, against police rates, were the same folks writing the demands and pushing the demands, right? The same folks leading the transformative justice processes that happen in community when we know we can't call the police, but we have to respond to harm. Again, it's the same group of people. There isn't a distinction, right? And because of this overlap of abolitionist and feminist organizing, because it is just one thing, it was harder for city council then to use domestic violence and sexual assault survivors as an excuse not to defund the police, right? Which is like one of the classic moves. Like, well, what about survivors? What about the rapists? What if we defund the police? We're like, oh, no, we've been doing work now for years, to move away from that anyway. And so we had a letter. We were able to very quickly organize a letter from over 200 survivors and people who work at domestic violence social service agencies saying, defund SPD is the thing that keeps us safe, right? Do not say you're not going to take money from the policing in our names. We actually know what keeps survivors safe, and it's housing, it's access to, appropriate mental health care. It's all the things we all know. And so fund that and take the money from the police. And so that, to me, has led to this moment where one of the wins we had in last year's budget when we were able to defund SPD for a second time was getting some money for a domestic violence work group that's focused on non-carceral solutions. And even getting the city to fund something called a non-carceral solution domestic violence work group makes me happy, but also makes me happy because it's literally meant to lead to the shutting down of the Seattle Municipal Court, right, which is our poor people's court in Seattle where misdemeanor cases are tried every day and where 1/3 of the cases are domestic violence misdemeanor cases. So we know if we're going to shut down that court, we need to have some solutions. We already know what the solutions are in community. And so let's formalize this and present this to the city in language that they understand. And all of that builds and builds and builds on folks like Lisa Bieria, who will be here this afternoon, on her work, on Emily Thuma's work with Communities Against Rape and Abuse years ago, right? And so I think the other thing for me with the feminist organizing is you don't know what groundwork you're laying, when you're in the 1990s, like one of the first groups or the early 2000s to say, sexual assault survivors don't need to call the police because we're offering you an alternative. You don't know that in 2021 and 2020 and 2022, that groundwork is going to be key to win a defund SPD fight. And so those through lines are part of what keep me going. I'll stop there.
Oh, we're coming back to you for your future visions, but please appreciate Angélica and everyone so far. And just to invite you all, of course, this is a long panel. Take care of yourselves. Hit the restroom, get hydrated. 200 people on Zoom. Get up, move around, do what you need to do. But keep your headphones in because more brilliance is coming. And I want to turn now to our other in-person guests because often people foolishly say that movements to defund, abolish police are not led by people directly impacted by multiple forms of violence, including survivors, when in fact they're deeply rooted in organizing of and by incarcerated, formerly incarcerated people. And historian Dan Berger traced one of the first calls to abolish the judicial prison parole industrial complex to the North Carolina Prisoners Labor Union from 1974. So someone who has really brought the organizing on the inside, outside, and also brought the feminist organizing on the outside, inside, and back outside again, is Richie Reseda. And so many folks here really were thrilled to hear that you were actually going to be here. They were super excited, and so am I. So please describe yourself, and tell us how feminism has shaped your work around prison abolition and beyond.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, y'all. I'm Richie Reseda. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm desperately light-skinned Black person with bleached hair and like these really cool like Raf Simons kind of like fake sunglasses, but they're like a sturdy plastic. It doesn't look cheap. And a baby blue hoodie that says abolish prisons, see reverse for details. And as long as we're doing the whole drip check, like also like the Supreme Cream Air Force Ones. I'm really into baby blue and tan because it looks like the desert. Anyway, that is the description of how I look. I think what I'd like to say about the way that feminism has interacted with my abolitionist work and vice versa. I mean, I really think that my most feminist abolitionist work is not the work that's ever in my bio. There's like no way, it's always the work that's the most invisibilized, and this is me as like a cis dude saying that. So I think that just goes to say like how much abolitionist feminist work really takes place from everyday women and non-binary people, like the people who talk to me. That goes unseen and that never makes it to panels and never makes it to books. And I mean, there's a lot of brilliant scholarship of folks like really trying to excavate that work and find it. But really the work that I've been doing the most of has been the work of building transformative justice skills for the people I'm in community with in real time. And a lot of those people are in prison, but all of them are not necessarily in prison, but the skills are scarce in every community and organization that I interact with. And I think as we, I mean, I come from traditional like power building organizing and policy work organizing and cultural organizing, which is my favorite, showing men, mostly men in prison, that we can be, that feminism gives us an access to freedom and whole humanness. But what I've learned, what I've been doing most recently is, as we've been doing all this amazing defund work, I've been really seeing that the skills of how to struggle with one another and how to be in conflict with one another, this is just my experience. Most abolitionist organizations don't actually have those skills. Like within the workings of the organization itself, folks are reflecting back the way that we're trained, which was in carceral culture. So in many ways, we're asking the system to do something that we're not even doing. We're asking legislators who are probably like, you know, those bell curves, like they're the end, you know, when it comes to like figuring out anything, like the legislators are going to get it last. And we, the like organizers, the people who came here, I can't overstate like how honored I am to be here. It's not missed on me that I'm, I think the only like cis male panelist in the whole conference. I really feel honored to be in these spaces and that my work is seen as worthy of being in these spaces. But it's the people who show up to spaces like this who are in the beginning of that bell curve. We get to learn those skills and teach them to others of like how to how to lead with, you know, I'll say more when we actually get to it, but that's that way of being, I think, the abolitionist feminist way of being, the everyday transformative justice skills of how to move through conflict, how to relate to people, is, I think, the most important learnings that I've been getting recently that I'm excited to share, because I truly feel like somebody said, there's been so many amazing things said, and I was like trying to take notes on my phone, but I think Ivette had said it's not just what, but how. And that how of it, I think, is where I'm finding that abolitionist feminism has been teaching me the most. Like, how do we move in community in a way that doesn't ultimately rely on violence and disappearing people if things don't go correct? So I've been really excited to be building those skills, sharing those skills within my communities, and hopefully be able to share some of that today too.
we definitely want to hear more about that and how it's shaping our future. I want to bring to the virtual stage one of the co-authors of the book that all of you need to purchase immediately, Abolition, period, Feminism, period, now, period. Erica Maynard, who we're just incredibly lucky to be joined by today, who, you know, articulated demands to defund and abolish police long before they were popular, who's offered really incredible, helpful frameworks for organizers to really assess whether demands further or hamper abolitionist goals. And I mean, you really just wrote a whole book in answer to this question that people should just read. But if you could please introduce and describe yourself, even though you disappeared from my screen alarmingly, about and share your perspectives, you know, as briefly, even that you wrote a whole book about it, around the feminist roots of abolitionist struggles. And just want to also note that you talk about how the idea for this book came from driving back and forth to prisons doing inside-outside education. So I know that a lot of what you're talking about is also roots of what Ritchie was talking about. But just introduce yourself, describe yourself, tell us where you're calling in from, and feminism, abolition, now, discuss.
So great to be here today. I know you write a book and then you think you don't have to talk at all because the book says everything, and here we are. So I just want to acknowledge Andrea, distinguished Andrea. I love that. Together, and the wider Scripps community. Such a smooth multi-tech situation today. I'm super impressed, and I'm really just humbled and honored to be here. Erica, she, they. I'm tall. You can't see that right now, although I'm sitting down. I'm wearing glasses. I have, just echoing Ricky, I have a stylish, I'm going to put that out there, a stylish a mullet with maybe brownish hair. I can't tell. I've just recently, a pandemic dye job. I'm a queer white person, and I'm wearing repping my local T-shirt for the Prison Neighborhood Arts and Education Project, part of the initiative that Andrea was just referencing here in Chicago. There in Chicago right now, I'm calling in from Lekwungen territory here, Victoria, Canada. I'm here with some of my dear biofam. So yeah, just really super thrilled to be here today. It's also really, especially also my laptop is on an overturned pot to try to lift it up a little bit. So it's a little rocky. I apologize for that. I was trying to find something to lift it up, and the last minute, all I could find was like a large pot. So it might not be the best strategy, but I'm working with it. But I love being here with a large group. I was kind of hoping I could just listen because, you know, with these fabulous groups, I was like, I'm just going to listen. Maybe I can only get like 2 minutes in. Because the conversations have been really rich. And one of the things that I was reminded about working on abolition feminism now was the power of working with people. And just on this call, I'm thinking about all the amazing networks and collectives and groups, both older and newer, near and far. Just a reminder that we're winning, right? And maybe if somebody wants to take on the project of doing some kind of like a Venn or a visual diagram, I think we need that, right? I think we need this feminist ecosystem, abolition feminist ecosystem sort of mapped out visually. I also just want to acknowledge the important work, and I think starting this conversation today with historians. I'm not a historian. I don't even play one on TV. But I think the amazing work that abolitionist feminist historians have been doing, Sarah, Treva, Emily, that continue to surface mobilizations, particularly Black feminist mobilizations. I think that having that genealogy and having those histories is such an important reminder in this moment. You know, we're in a moment, a sort of a backlash to the defund, a backlash to all of our campaigns and mobilizations. And I think, of course, that's not a surprise for many of us. We've been there before. And I think having these histories is a reminder of this long arc and this long scope of work, and a reminder, of course, that we're going to have backlash. And I think this is the moment to study. This is the moment to continue to organize. This is the moment to continue to learn and shift and recognize our people. And also, just as Ivette was just framing, that really fabulous language, even when we lose, we still win. And I'll just repeat that: even when we lose, we still win. Of course, we want to win. We want to close the jail. We want to move that money from police to affirming services in our community that support people to flourish. But as important, right? As important as winning, whatever we want to think about winning is the political education materials, the changes in this to consciousness and language, the cultural shifts, the through lines that Angélica was just talking about, like those kind of connections. We need those political shifts. So of course we want to win. We want to get someone free. We want to save a life. That's central. But as important is this slower horizontal work of political education, changing consciousness and language. And we are doing that. So that process is as important as the process, not just the what, right? As Ivette and Richie were both framing, but the how. How we do the work is as important as the outcomes. And one of our goals with abolition feminism now wasn't to reify or make static another thing. You know, I think sometimes those of us in university spaces, it's like another thing that we all have to like check off or be or do or say. But we felt like writing the project was an attempt to amplify all this, collective struggles, our campaigns, our histories. Many people have just been sort of referencing so many incredible campaigns and projects, and create this abolitionist, feminist ecosystem as a dialectic, as a tension, as a project, as an interruption. And it really is, as many folks have just been articulating, the everyday work of people, right? Largely women, largely, queer folks, largely people of color, like largely anti-capitalist organizers. It is this everyday work of networks and people who are demanding and making, abolitionist feminist frameworks. So I can't remember the question, Andrea, but maybe I got her.
You totally answered it in multiple and beautiful forms. And then I'm going to come back around to ask you about abolitionist futures that you point to in the book, which are multiple and beautiful.
Love that. Okay. So
all right. So we'll be back to you, and we're going to go now to someone who's actually, I think, near you on similar Haida and other territory, who I think really brings some of the most expansive visions of abolition, because she takes us beyond abolition of police and prisons and also of ICE, but just to borders themselves, which I think even some abolitionists might be like, whoa, that's like a bridge too far. But it really implicates questions around the nation state that Mariam and I alluded to last night, and just kind of what kind of futures we imagine for ourselves globally. So Harsha Walia is one of the founders of No One is Illegal. She's the author of Border and Rule, which is on that back table, which you must pick up or get from your library, and really pushes us to understand that abolition doesn't come without an end to borders and an end to imperialism. So Harsha, if you could please introduce and describe yourself and tell us how that view is rooted in feminism.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. It's so good to see you all, and truly just want to echo what an honor it is to be here alongside. Thank you everyone for all of this work to bring us together. And I'm just so thrilled and excited. My name is Harsha Walia. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I look like a light-skinned Punjabi queer femme. I have black hair, probably similar to others, now peppered a lot with gray, more than I know. And I have glasses on, I've got headphones on. I'm not sure if you can see my shirt on screen or not, but it's embroidered blue and orange. And I'm on unceded Coast Salish territories. These are the lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Indigenous nations who continue to steward these lands. And really, in terms of thinking about feminism, the entire foundation of settler colonialism as a project of gendered violence is something that I have learned from so many Indigenous organizers, Indigenous feminists, Indigenous trans and two-spirit people. I would echo a lot of what folks have said in terms of, feminism for me, both being a framework of thinking, but really more so of doing. A practice of how we come to this work, of how we organize together. Really the idea that the system was not broken, that it's built this way, right? Like Angélica, as you said, feminism for me is what taught me that. And so one of the movements that I've been involved with for decades was No One Is Illegal. And it's very framing, is this idea that, you shift the gaze from individuals and proving innocence to really this idea that no human being is illegal, right? Which is parallel to ideas of free them all. And the idea that a human being cannot be illegal. It's the state's legal systems, the foundation of the state that creates illegality, that creates constructs of criminality. And so for me, that was, a feminist framing, right, of understanding the system as inherently violent. A lot of my organizing was in the immediate kind of post 9/11 era. And this heightened, in Canada, as in the United States, this heightened, escalated time of white supremacy, of gendered Islamophobia impacting particularly Black and brown Muslims, of detentions, escalated detentions, raids, deportations, and more. And often seeing that, in even mainstream movements, a lot of it focused on cis men, right? That a lot of the emphasis was on freeing cis men, on looking at the impacts in Guantanamo Bay, for example, but also that, seeing that even in those forms of incarceration and detention, rape and sexual violence was such a critical tool of detention and deportation and the war on terror, right? Like that it is impossible to not see sexual violence and gendered violence as pervasive in this form of state violence, but also the very specific gendered ways in which in the post 9/11 climate, gendered Islamophobia and border control practices were amplified, right? So the kind of forced unveiling of Muslim women, the idea that the occupation of Afghanistan was justified as liberating Afghan women. And one of my first influences amongst many, as a young person, kind of through this internationalist lens, was the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, RAWA. And RAWA made very clear how war and occupation, how the war and occupation and how the imperialist US-led, of which Canada was a part and NATO was a part, that imperialist invasion was not a feminist mission, despite even a lot of feminists who kind of rode that bandwagon, right? In the same way that a lot of feminists ride the carceral bandwagon, that somehow the state and state violence and military violence will, quote unquote, save women and gender diverse people. So for me, there's this continuity of how imperialist feminism and carceral feminism are really white supremacist savior missions more than anything, right? And middle-class saving missions. And so that for me was a really foundational way in which I understood state violence as being fundamentally anti-feminist, right? That is the nature of state violence, whether it's borders, whether it's prisons, whether it's detention centers, whether it's the military, all of this. And that there was a contradiction. Most of my paid work alongside organizing in No One Is Legal has been in the anti-violence sector. And I think, as folks have alluded to, there's no way you will turn into an abolitionist feminist if you're not one already than working in the anti-violence sector with survivors, like seeing how people who survive violence are criminalized every single day, overtly through the police, as a result of police sexual violence, as a result of child services apprehending your children, the regulation of poverty, the regulation of sex work, the criminalization of drug use, the criminalization if you're an undocumented person trying to report violence, how you fear criminalization, deportation, child apprehension, all of it. So that for me was the other way through which feminism hugely influenced my analysis, was working every single day with hundreds of survivors and seeing how the state, not as a coincidence, but as a deliberate tactic, actively fails survivors, right? Like that is a way to maintain that gendered social violence. And, today, one of the things that really irks me, and I mean, this is like irked people for decades, but right now, one of the responses to defund movements, at least where I'm located, and, movements that I support, is that one of the things the cops and their enablers and really the whole legal system point to is, of course, sexual violence, right? Like what about the rapists, et cetera, that folks have spoken to? The other thing is mental health. So the kind of, quote unquote, softer policing of mental health. And as someone who worked in a drop-in center, there's no one who knows how to de-escalate better than folks in community. And there's no one who ruins that for people than the police and border patrol and immigration enforcement, right? So that for me is also a feminist understanding that like we keep each other safe, as has been said, and that feminism as a practice is really about how we organize, how we care for each other, how we build abundance, and also how we build our skills, that we don't abdicate our own responsibilities for how we show up for each other. So that for me was really my entry point through feminism, and really seeing feminism as foundational to all of it.
Thank you so much, Harsha. We are about to transition to our next question, and our last speaker on this panel is joining us by video, and we'll answer both questions. And I'm going to come back around to all of you panelists for kind of a 2-minute glimpse into feminist abolitionist futures before we close out at 30 minutes at the top of or 30 minutes after the hour. So I also want to acknowledge that Toni Michelle Williams was supposed to be here today and couldn't be, precisely because of the conditions that make movements to defund and abolish policing in prisons a Black trans feminist-led movement. Because one of the members of the trans-led organization that she co-founded and directs, Solutions Not Punishment Collaborative in Atlanta, went missing last week and just was found in a hospital in New York City. So Toni Michelle is with them and taking care of them and their community right now. She's been an incredible teacher and comrade to me over the past decade, so I really encourage you to learn more about and support SNAPCO's work by Googling them and looking them up. We're sorry she's not here with us today, but we know her teachings and vision are. So the person who's going to straddle by video both questions, and then I'm going to come back around in the same order for visions of abolitionist feminist futures, is Woods Irvin, who is the National Organizing and Communications Director at Critical Resistance, formerly with Interrupting Criminalization, Transgender Intersex Justice Project, and Broadway Youth Center, but shared some words with us in advance. So if we could show that now, males, that would be awesome.
Welcome, virtually Woods. So we're going to pose the question to you now. How has Black feminism shaped your analysis and organizing, both from Broadway Youth Center, Transgender Intersex Justice Project, and now at Critical Resistance?
Wow, that's a big question, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to start. Well, I also actually can start with my work at the Broadway Youth Center. As a young trans person, I came into this movement work as a youth worker supporting street-based trans youth in Chicago, and something that those of us who worked at the Broadway Youth Center just knew was that the young people we work with regularly came into contact with police, and that part of the difficulty of supporting the young people was that we would do lots of work to build relationships between the young people and the institutions they needed to get access to housing and to schooling and to jobs and to any of the sort of meager low-income supports that Chicago and the state of Illinois offered. But one instance of contact with police oftentimes would completely unravel months of work. We did, I think, some interesting organizing at the time to use HIPAA to keep police out of the space, and we were trying to really practice a transformative justice approach as best we could to supporting young people. And I think that that's kind of where my abolitionist praxis started to really flower. So I can jump us forward to I think my work at TGIJP. So and I think that talking about trans people in this moment, given the escalating attacks by the far right on trans young folks, as well as on the rights of women and gender oppressed people more broadly, I think is something that folks are, and if not, should be aware of. So I think this is right on time to be talking about this particular entry into the work. But so TGIJP, or the Transgender Gender Variant Intersex Justice Project, is an organization that was founded by Miss Major Griffin Gracie, and how TGIJP was informed clearly by Black feminist organizing is that Miss Major spent basically a majority of her life giving 110% since her own incarceration in Attica in the 1970s to support and fight for the release of incarcerated trans people, and specifically Black trans women. And that clearly informed both the birth and politic of TGIJP, and the work it does to this day, as well as the impact that TGIJP's organizing and Miss Major's legacy has had on trans organizing more broadly. And so the way that she and the organizers that founded TGIJP articulated abolitionist praxis is significant, especially during this moment. So as Angela Davis has noted, by demonstrating Black currently and formerly incarcerated trans women's experience, and resourcing their methods of survival and leadership, we illuminate more facets of how the parts of the PIC function together, as well as the collective imagination and political determination that it takes to bring that into being, right? And so that imagination and political leadership are a crucial part of the abolitionist struggle. So that's something that I definitely learned more of as I got to work in TGIJP. So for CR, which is where I currently work, so CR, it was founded by Angela Davis, she's one of the 1998 conference organizers and a longtime supporter and friend. And so her book, Women, Race, and Class from 1983, which articulates like a history of Black women and the fight for women's liberation in the United States across time, is a key text in helping shape the mission and vision and of CR's politic. There are the founders of the organization, some of whom were also conference organizers with Angela Davis. So and founders of the organization, Kayi Lumumba Barrow and Ruth Wilson Gilmore, I would say political heavyweights in general, but also particularly in the abolitionist movement, whose work around freeing criminalized survivors and political prisoners really shapes the analysis and the praxis at CR. There's so much to talk about. There's the CR insight statement, which pivotal moment was the development of the CR insight statement, when an issue that was named that the feminist movement focused on idealized white womanhood as the sort of crystallization of what it meant to be a survivor. It wasn't taking into account what was happening to survivors, particularly Black women, who defended themselves against attack. And then on the other hand, the anti-prison movement really focused on work led by men and centering men, and needed to address sort of address contradictions in the movement more broadly. I think from that period, we get into the sort of against carceral feminism orientation. So this is like the time in which members of CR were waging campaign work against carceral feminism, members of CR and more broadly, were waging work against carceral feminism and continued shaping thinking there, as there was a push at that period for expansion of women's, specifically women's jails and prisons, the sort of pink washing of jails and prisons, which is particularly outrageous given the number in general, but like thinking about like the simultaneous practicing of shackling of pregnant people during this period is just like the sort of dissonance in the PIC is just like unreal at times. So yeah, I'll move us forward to, like the late 2000s and the founding of SRLP, TIP, the Trans in Prison Project, and which eventually becomes TGIJP, lifting up the struggles of trans people in prison. And specifically TIP was coming together around the same time as like the 2008 CR conference. There's the work of Beth Ritchie, informing us around the rise of the incarceration among Black women, rising faster in the it was the fastest increase or in the prison population, even though incarceration rates in the late 2000s, early 2010s were plateauing at the time, largely due to the work that we had been doing. But then we had missed that Black women were like that was an area that needed tending, and then that's where I think a lot of the work that you have been doing and Miriam have been doing really comes in. And so the work, the writing that you've been doing around harm experienced by Black women, femmes, and girls at the hands of police officers at any point in contact, on the street, in schools, in cop cars, in homes, informed the gaps that we had in our analysis of policing. And then, clearly Miriam's work around criminalized survivors, drawing on this long history of organizing, defending, for the self-defense of Black women, and more recently, the organizing around criminalized survivors and launching Survived and Punished, I think sort of draws this sort of long arc of Black feminist organizing that both informs the politic and practice of CR, but that also, as somebody who's been in CR for well over a decade, has definitely informed my practice and organizing. And I mean, I could say so much more about like what I've read and who, my sweet mom and aunties and how they organize. But I want to try and keep it as succinct as I can. So yeah.
That was an amazing, like, brief and deep history of Black feminist origins of abolitionist movements. I want to lift up your role in that as well, Woods. I feel like, you definitely were instrumental at interrupting criminalization, in shaping the work that we've done there, and just bringing these through lines from the streets of Chicago to being a national director at Critical Resistance really kind of also shows how deeply Black feminist stories and narratives and personhood is shaping all of these movements in this moment. I'm going to ask you to leave us with like a brief, hopeful thought about how Black feminism can shape our visions for the future.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, just to speak to the moment, really quickly, so I think that you wrote a really beautiful history of the tactic of defund for the abolitionist newspaper. Thank you so much for doing that. And I think that what that history proved is that the tactic, even though it's been used, sort of defund as a tactic has been used to fight prison expansion, to fight jail expansion, to fight police expansion now, that the tactic is gained a lot of traction and nuance as it's passed across time and landscape, proving that it's really durable. And which, given the backlash that we're currently experiencing, is really heartening right now. And also, I think every campaign that you mentioned in that piece, whether it be stopping the prison boom in California, jail fights in New York, LA, and San Francisco, fights against policing in the Bay Area, and all the way now to the work that folks at Black Visions and Reclaim the Block are doing, all have major victories using that tactic, right? And as abolitionists, we know first they dismiss it, then they get outraged, then we make it controversial, and then we fight for the win. So let's keep fighting for the win, y'all.
Thanks so much, Woods, for joining us and for all the work you've done over all the years that brought us to this moment in this conference. We're so grateful.
Thank you. We're going to come back there, but I want to make sure that we get to our folks who have been patiently waiting on Zoom for some time, and just again ask folks to give us like the 2-minute insight into where you see abolition feminist futures going, starting with you, Kandace.
Great. I'm a little bit more warmed up. I was not expecting to go first last time. You know,
You always are first.
No. No. Yeah, well, thank you all. And this has been so inspiring. A couple minutes on my feminist abolitionist vision of the world and our future. During the video that you played, I started to cry with the little young chubby Black girl who was rapping and just laying it down, 2 bars, honey. Because I think that for me, so much of the vision that I hope for and see for in our future is really one in which our belonging is never questioned. And especially in which the prison industrial complex, the culture of punishment are not used as ways to question our belonging and or our worth and our dignity. And I think that that's so important when I see other little Black girls loving themselves, that is part of my vision as well, is that we never have an experience in which we are asked to question our worth or punished for being our full selves, but rather given the care and the nurturing that we deserve to really flourish. That is such a huge part of the vision for me. The other big part of my vision is also rooted in seeing single Black moms like my sister struggle, and struggle to get the care that they need, struggle to be able to protect themselves from partners who are not safe, without having to criminalize that person and bring the state into their familyhood. I think that is a big part of it, and a lot of it for me. And then in the ways that Black Visions is talking about it, as we are both trying to talk to folks about like, hey, there's a world possible without police. There's a way to address harm in our communities without police. That like the message that resonates the most with our folks is one when we're sharing a vision of care. Folks actually jump on and are more willing to come with us when we're not talking about like what happens instead of police, but what can happen in our communities when our resources are actually stewarded in a way to take care of our needs. When youth programming is fully funded, when folks have housing, when folks have access to healthcare, when folks have jobs that, treat them with dignity and respect, like these are the types of things that influence my abolitionist vision, because they're the ones that I can see resonate the deepest in people's hearts when I'm talking to them at the doors or when I'm talking to them, wherever it is. And so I think that's really important for me to be taking in. And especially as a feminist, one of my biggest pieces is, I think that my politicization has taught me that, my role as a person who has been socialized as a woman, but also identifies as a femme, in seeing things like softness and nurturing as weaknesses, trying to push back on that, right? And a vision in which softness is not seen as a weakness, but actually something that is as a strength, is really important for me. And the ways in which women, especially Black women, have always shown up, have always brought in care, that being something that we are not just holding ourselves, that all of us are holding. That is also part of my vision. And I think someone was naming this earlier, but also part of that is our like muscles are strengthened, not like physically, I don't see our muscles strengthened, maybe, I don't know, but like our actual muscles for collective care and showing up for each other have been strengthened through deep practice with each other. I really appreciated what folks were saying earlier of like, we actually have to be in practice of doing this right now. And that is part of what informs my vision. And the last piece is especially that Black people get to live with dignity and die in dignity. I think that is really important. I'm a caretaker of my dad, who is disabled and suffers from chronic illness, largely because he was a poor Black man growing up in the South. And the ways in which I see him being treated by the medical industrial complex, the ways that I see him criminalized for his health, basically, in the ways that like every single day it's a struggle to make sure that he is getting care that he's needed, and also realizing that at the end of the day, like he's in a process of transitioning, and that he deserves that dignity is a huge part of how I ground my work right now. And when we're thinking about solutions, like we are not just thinking about, we are thinking about the full spectrum of life. And what is actually really needed to support people in being able to do that. And so those are some, key pieces of that vision. And I think that there are some concrete steps that we can take in between that, because I'm also very clear as abolitionist, as somebody who looks to history as a way to, build my strategy moving forward, is that like, I am most likely not going to be here for all of this. And even to understand that because of the ways that I've been socialized, because of the ways we've all been socialized, that we actually are not capable of creating those full visions of what life looks like beyond what it is right now. And that a lot of our work is about starting to practice that, starting to crack open some of those containers so that the young folks who, as a genderqueer person, the young people are like, fuck gender, what's that, right? Like they're able to think even further beyond what I'm able to. And so recognizing that like all of the work is not going to be done by my hands, but I am in a way setting up a path for folks to push me, further. And hopefully like one day I'm gonna be old and not as radical. And I think that is part of the vision and the work in between, is to really think about how are we consistently pushing that edge, creating some mechanisms that do reduce harm, that keep people as safe as possible, that create access for Black people, especially, this is my lane, to be able to build power and be able to make the decisions in their lives that makes sense, and that along that way we're going to have to wrestle with some hard questions. You know, I had last year during our campaign, I had Andrea hit me up like, are y'all sure about this? You know, like we have to make some compromises around what we're fighting for in order to create some of those containers that are going to bring folks to the next stop, so to speak. And so I think it is both about projecting this vision, this radical vision, but also being able to articulate to folks what are some of the benchmarks, if you will, along the way that we can look forward to, and that as we move towards those, we are actually able to practice something that goes deeper and beyond our own lifetimes, is, you know, how I would share my vision.
Thank you so much, Kandace, for laying that out for us, and just all the ways you've shaped all of our visions and futures over the past 2 years. I let you go more than 2 minutes because I know that your vision has been so informative for all of us, and also sending you so much love on that journey with your father. Many of us have been on those journeys, and we know that doing this organizing while on that work is a challenge. And also because it reminded me of a moment in a meeting early on with the Minneapolis City Council, like very early on in the days after George Floyd had been murdered, when a council member said something to you about like, well, but what's your vision for the world without police? And you literally were like, the word vision is in my organization's name. Like, I got visions for you, and you just laid it out. It was really beautiful. So appreciate you for that. Everybody give it up for Black Visions. And Richie, who is here on campus, and all the other folks who have been critical parts of that work. Robyn, tell us in 2 minutes or less the vision for Black feminist futures, abolitionist futures, from where you sit. I know this is a hard challenge, but I know you're up for it.
The 2-minute challenge, absolutely. Right. Thanks so much. I mean, there's so much that I could say about this. And I think the first thing that I would want to say is just that, you know, about feminism shaping abolitionist visions is, as Erica pointed out, you know, feminism is nothing if not, you know, a living network of feminists, right? Of feminists as people. So I remember meeting you, Andrea, at this 2010 Cop Watch conference in Winnipeg. Harsha, I remember driving around in a car blasting Public Enemy with you. And I know that even at that time, hearing both of you, you know, over a decade ago now, changed my analysis and my work in ways that are really important. And of course, movements are more than just the people that we know, if they're going to be successful, especially. But I think it's important to highlight how our feminist comrades inspire us and shape our thinking and push us to be smarter and better, because we want to keep up. And I think, you know, we want to keep doing work that is solid and ethical and has integrity. So I just really want to highlight, you know, all of those movements that I think keep all of us together and in this work. And there's so much I could say about this, but I do think that parenting and being the feminist parent of a young Black boy is teaching me some of the most important things about abolition and feminism and building. Because of course, with a 6-year-old who you want to show what the world is, you can't focus on policing as violence and killings only, right? You need to hone in on that imagination part. With a younger kid, you need to focus on the building end. So last year, I was part of a campaign with other penal abolitionists across Canada, creating part of what we were calling a Choosing Real Safety platform. We were trying to build off the momentum of the Black Lives Matter statements made by unions and health communities and the broader left to push folks further, more explicitly toward abolitionist and towards defund, dismantle, and build was the sort of 3-pronged strategy that we'd highlighted. But it's this building part that's a crucial part of teaching, of organizing, and of parenting, to say, if not this, then what else, right? So when a police cruiser goes by, you know, I can say, yo, Lamar, imagine these cars were pink and turquoise. Imagine they weren't police, but they were people just driving around, giving out sandwiches to people in our neighborhood that needed a meal. And this has turned into a game that we play when we go by a police station. You know, we play the game of what else could or should be there. You could fit 10 ice cream trucks and still have room for 4 families to live. That green space could be a garden. You know, he says, Mama, imagine that was an arcade that was filled with kids and teenagers playing Minecraft, right? So exactly, this is a valuable exercise for all of us. Kids understand, I think, very well that if not this, then what else? Not only what's wrong with the world, but the necessity of building something else. And this is something that I think we all really need to, you know, especially as feminists, is something that we're very much always bringing into to our practice. So that is one of the ways that I think that I continue to really focus on that visioning in my day-to-day life at this time. And, you know, if I have 15 more seconds, I would maybe just also add, the fact that I think we've seen such important wins even within feminism. For me, so much of my own personal experience has actually been talking, and really fighting against carceral feminists over the meaning for abolition in Quebec, where I was organizing for much of my life. The people that called themselves abolitionists were carceral feminists who are working to criminalize to criminalize sex work, to criminalize sex workers, right? So when we would try to organize against police and against policing, we would be called the pimp lobby, and really mocked and castigated in these important ways. So even though the carceral feminists have won from an institutional and legislative level in many ways, in terms of the ongoing criminalization of gendered violence and using police and policing as a response, I do think we've seen an enormous cultural win in terms of, Mariam Kaba often asks us to really be specific about PIC abolition as abolition. And I think those two visions together, abolition as the ending of policing and caging, especially now that we're really seeing with some of the works, put together by you and by others here on this panel today, telling us, really linking abolition and feminism crucially, are showing that abolition is absolutely about building, is not only about, again, ending policing and caging, but is about building that something else, is about building that safety in real time. So I do think we need to count our wins, and that has been a really valuable win on the cultural front as far as this bigger horizon of what now abolitionist futures can look like. So keeping it.
Here's the problem with inviting your friends and people who you love and admire to speak on panels. It's really hard to be a good moderator because you're like that. And thank you for the beautiful vision of how you organize through your parenting. I really appreciate that. Yvette, LA, tell us the visions for abolitionist futures in LA through your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kandace and Robyn really spoke to the power and the visioning of our young people. And when I look at the work of YJC, the Youth Justice Coalition, the Young Women's Freedom Center, when I'm looking at the work of young people on the ground, actually building that transformative change just here in LA, in our backyard, we have the free high school in South Central LA, which is just really providing a safe home for our young people so that they can then take leadership in our movements, in our organizing. And, young people are doing incredible policy work, but they're also doing incredible internal healing work. When I look at my 18-year-old brother that is really looking to ancestral healing practices to break the cycles of patriarchy, that's inspiring to me to see our young people, see folks like Richie Reseda in the room, who is really leaning in and modeling what feminism can look like for other men. And I'll just say, Richie, the work that you do, shared it with my siblings, and it's just been really incredible to see the power and the change within the men in my family and in my life and my community because of the work that you do. So that gives me hope. And the fact that we're already building the alternative, Justice LA and Dignity and Power Now and so many other organizations here in Los Angeles are already building the alternative crises models to respond to mental health crises in our community. We are building the alternatives. We are building actual buildings, actual physical space where our communities can thrive and organize and build the future. So I feel incredibly hopeful and incredibly blessed to be part of the current change and wave that's already happening in Los Angeles. It's not in the future, it's happening right now.
Thank you, Yvette. Woo, give it up for DPF. All the Canadian organizers and people pick on lawyers, but we know how to keep it to 2 minutes because when we're in court, they just cut our mics. So go, Angélica.
That's true. I usually have a watch, so you can just pick me when it's 2 minutes. I think for me, it goes back to what you and Mariam were talking about yesterday, that abolition feminism cares about safety for everyone, everywhere, all the time. And so our vision for the world we're building requires us to abolish the silos between us and the other movements that are not represented here today, right? And that's part of what we're trying to do in Seattle with something we call Solidarity Budget, right? And so this came together because when we made a demand to defund SPD by 50% and asked for all of the things that our community actually needs, the investments in Black communities, the city came back and said, oh, there's this coalition that just forced us to tax Amazon for the first time. We'll just pull that money and give that to you, and we'll leave the police with their money. And we all came together and said, absolutely not. You know, the folks who won that fight said, you know, we're all about defunding the police. We're like, well, we're all about Green New Deal, housing for all the things that they were asking for. And so we said, no, we took on the feminist value of collaboration over competition and said, this scarcity they're trying to put on us, that is their scarcity, right? Like, they have created that scarcity. We have enough. There is enough to go around. It is their choice to put 1/4 of our city's general fund into police and police pensions, right? Like, we got to free that money, and we want all of it, right? And so now we have written the city budget together that would provide childcare for all. You know, we've priced out what it would cost to have universal basic income for our single moms. We've priced out what would it cost to have sidewalks in all of our neighborhoods, right? And that is money we want to pull directly from court and prosecutor and police budgets, right? And so that, to me, is the vision, is how do we de-silo and see all of our fights as connected, because they are. That is the only way we survive, and that requires a feminist way of being and acting.
That's right. What? See? That's how it goes. That's how you do it. And you're all brilliant. And give it up for Decrim Seattle, winning 2 years in a row. Big. Richie, break it down for us. 2 minutes. Your freedom.
Yeah, I think that the future that I envision is one where we take regular maintenance of our relationships and communities. You know, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, and that's the last time I'll say that word, I promise, is really teaches us to treat everything like it's fine until it's not, and then to use either violence or threats of violence to make things fine again, like fake fine, whether it's we're gonna fire you or we're gonna lock you up or we're gonna kill you or we're gonna deport you, right? So you better act right. I think that an abolitionist feminist future really require, and not just I think, but leaning on the Black abolitionist work that I was trained in, that future really requires us to actually check in and maintain the health of our relationships the same way that we need to check in and maintain the health of our bodies, not just wait for it to be fucked up and then take a pill. Furthermore, I would say that it is one that requires us to lean into conflict as information and take it outside of the paradigm of right and wrong. Patriarchy is obsessed with right and wrong, because if you're wrong, then I can punish you, then I can dominate you and make you right. And I think that we're actually called to lean into conflict with curiosity, and courage and hope, and belief in transformation, rather than trying to find out who is right and who is wrong, and now it's punish who is wrong. And I think I'm really naming the skills that we need to build in the future, because I'm trying to just make it as practical and plain as possible for us, because I don't think that, you know, like we talked earlier of James Baldwin's quote that history is now, and Ivette talked about how the future is now. Like, we're already building these skills now, but I think the world that we really want to build is the one where there's norms. So the final norm that I'll name is really, I think, a value for transformation. I don't think that we have that as a shared value yet, as a norm, even within our movements. I think that we still have a value for punishment and revenge. And there's something that we feel like this feels closed and complete now because the person who did harm has been harmed. And I think we need to develop the value of this feels closed and complete because the person who did harm has transformed those beliefs, and has transformed those behaviors. That's hard to do, especially when the harm is, when we're talking, you know, we're talking about very serious harm. We're talking about sexual violence. We're talking about deadly violence. Like, it's hard to see somebody who is like, yes, I committed that sexual violence. I can be accountable about it. I can talk about the skills that I've developed to make sure I never do that again and help other people not do that again. And be like, okay, that conflict is quote unquote resolved. We can't speak on behalf of the healing of the person who endured it, but you know what I'm saying? It's hard to see that person and be okay with that, as opposed to, I just have to harm them in some little way, even in our small interpersonal interactions. Like, I still feel a pull to, if someone embarrassed me or whatever, it's like, yeah, I'll go through a transformative process with them, but I want to shoot some kind of subliminal or some kind of little nudge to show you, like, how dare you embarrass me, or how dare you hurt me? Like, I'm gonna hurt you in some small way. Anyway, I believe those are the norms that we have to build to truly have the abolitionist feminist future that we want. The world without prisons and police is actually a world where we are more concerned with accountability and more concerned with how we treat each other.
Please give it up for Ritchie and all the work that Ritchie's doing with question culture. Erica Maynard, like you said, you wrote a book and we're grateful you stuck around past time, but please tell us the future that you envision for abolition feminism now.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'll be under 2 minutes. I think all these brilliant panelists have already made the point that the work is happening now in all kinds of sort of super detailed ways, campaigns, sort of the intimacies of everyday life. I'm just so grateful to hear and learn about new initiatives and also to hear more detail about old initiatives. The one little point I'll make in my remaining 1 minute is abolitionist feminist work is already thinking about time differently. And I think this is really important. The now makes our future, right? And the future is now. So this temporality, this attention to temporality, we don't get sucked into this linearity of some progress narrative or the myth that there's some finish line we're gonna cross. This attention to time or temporality is a feminist point. It's a methodology that comes from resistant and subjugated peoples, right? And all the examples from the panelists this morning are just giving me so much energy. Like right now, there's a convening happening in New York, the Beyond the Bars. So I'm thinking like coast to coast in this moment, people are exercising, as Kandace was saying, and Robyn was saying, those imaginative muscles, right? About revolutionary work, about different kinds of future, and they're doing it in the now. And I just want to notice the labor about who's doing this work, just as like a reminder for us to look around. Of course, queer folks, Black folks, women, people inside prisons. And I just have deep, deep love and respect and honor to be learning from our fabulous community. So thank you for the labor and yes.
Thank you. That's an organizer who's been on the door and knows that they have 2 minutes to articulate a vision that will keep someone in conversation. So thank you, Erica, for being here. Harsha, give us your 2 minute vision for the future to close us out of a world without borders and policing and punishment of any kind.
2 minute challenge. I just want to echo what an honor it is to be alongside all of you and to be learning and thinking alongside. I would say, one thing about thinking about futures is, and particularly for those of us who are organizers, one thing we have to hold on to, of course, is hope, right? Mariam Kaba reminds us amongst many. And the reality that we're making the future now. So it's not just the future vision, but how and what we're building now. And I think about that as like, what is the best way in which I and we can be a future ancestor, right? Like the best possible future ancestor. And for me, that vision is, when we're saying no police, when we're saying no borders, when we're saying no prisons, we're thinking about policing and bordering systems at large, like not just the institutions, but how these systems can exist beyond that, right? Like we know that the border doesn't just exist at the border. The cops don't just exist as police, but they're also, when we're looking at alternatives, we're not thinking about replacing carceral institutions with other forms of similarly punitive carceral methods of being, whether that's our healthcare system or social workers or anti-violence organizations, that the alternatives we're building root out violence rather than reproduce violence in another name. So I think that's also part of that future is how do we eliminate all forms of policing and ordering and exploitation and capitalism, et cetera, at its root, rather than reproduce it or reconfigure it. And I think the last thing that I would say and echo as has been said is like, the vision that we build is a movement muscle that we build, right? Like we build in through our praxis, methods of collaboration, of coalitional work, of how do we work together by building solidarity, because solidarity is the only thing that is greater than fear. Community and resistance is the only thing that is greater than fear. And we will only win by winning together. There is literally no liberation possible in isolation. It is fundamentally not possible. So how do we build abundance? How do we build group-centered leadership? That's not a future. that's a present that we all build together now, we are building now. And so for me, that's also part of that future is, what is the foundation that we are building on, and how do we add to it in our methods of how we work, of how we show up for each other, how we ensure that we don't treat each other as disposable, as commodities, as only productive when we show up in certain ways. And how do we value all forms of labor, right? Like, we are all needed in this ecosystem. We all have gifts in this ecosystem. And that to me is fundamentally also what this abolitionist feminist principle and future is about, is valuing all people, all bodies, valuing the land, valuing our gifts, to show up and be the best selves that we can, and trust that we will build this together.
Hallelujah. Bring the meat on the fire at the end. Thank you, Harsha. Thank you, all of you who've been sitting on Zoom for 2 million hours now. And in this room, as it slowly rises in temperature, I've been getting texts from everyone, including folks on the panel, about each other, about how all their movement crushes are speaking and talking. And I hope that many more have been developed. Really want to thank our interpreters who put up with the fact that as we got to the end, we just kept talking faster and faster as they were more and more tired. I want to thank the audience for being here live. Want to thank everyone who's tweeting on AbFem2022. Please keep sharing all the wisdom that's been dropped in this room out in the world. Wanted to hope nobody got injured by the thing that fell over. And just let folks know the conversations are continuing this afternoon. We'll start at 45 minutes after the next hour to give people a full hour break. And we'll be diving more into these questions of carceral feminism, about what and resisting carceral feminism, about what intersectional resistance of all forms of carcerality looks like. So there's a lot more in store. And then also tomorrow, as we talk about what kinds of policy changes we need to do to make these futures possible. But we'll see you in an hour at 45 minutes to the next hour, wherever you are. Thanks so much to all for being here today.